how do you restore a damaged population, and how do you augment the catch of wild trout? The thing about wild trout is obviously people say, well, we need bigger fish. Well, I think the photograph I showed earlier on, you know, you do get big trout in rivers. And obviously that's not in England, that's in Iceland, but that's a pretty big wild trout, I think you'll all agree. Probably we're not going to get that on any of the Dartmoor streams. But you know, how big do they need to be? And I know a lot of our enthusiasts here will go out and they'll enjoy a wonderful day's sport with small wild fish using appropriate tackle. And you know, this constant sort of strive for bigger and bigger fish. And I think I see that peak has gone, coming from sort of Hampshire and the River Test and that part of the world where it just seems to be getting ridiculous, bigger fish all the time. And I do sense that people have realised that what a folly that is, and that, you know, you can have a fantastic day's sport with fairly small, medium-sized fish. A little bit about sea trout, because I think it never ceases to amaze me that people don't often equate with the fact that, well, actually, sea trout are trout too. You cannot ignore the fact that when you stock a river that has sea trout runs, you're likely to impact on sea trout just as much as you are on brown trout. And we had a really good debate recently with the Dart Rivers Association. There's a couple of members here today where they quite rightly expressed some concerns about their own trout stocking programs on sea trout. Primarily the Dart, fantastic river for migratory fish, and that particular club has taken the decision, well, actually we're going to draw a line under our stocking of fertile fish because they were so concerned about potential impacts to sea trout. And obviously we get fixated about the interaction, the spawning interaction between domesticated fish and wild fish, but of course there's also, you know, predation and competition for space, which obviously needs to be talked about. So a little bit about the wild broodstock considerations. This is a fish being stripped on the bank, green eggs to be stocked into bankside incubator box to basically try and get more wild fish into a Hampshire chalk river. I think what you have to recognise is that every fish that you take out and you do that to, obviously that fish isn't going to spawn in the wild. There's no reason why some of these fish will not produce something in the wild, and you have to take that into account when you're taking numbers of broodstock out and committing them to a broodstock scheme. Now I know there are some schemes going, and we've got Peter here from the Wiltshire Fisheries, from the Wilton Fishing Club, where there's an opportunity to obtain broodstock that would potentially perish. Well, fair enough. If they're not going to produce anything, well then you've got, you know, that doesn't apply. You've got nothing to lose. But it is a consideration you have to take. You know, it's not a free party. If you take broodstock out and commit them to a hatchery scheme, you run them to all sorts of risks, including, you know, dying, going fungusy, before you actually get anything out of them. And one of the difficulties is that you often, you know, you commit wild fish into a fish farm environment and they don't behave like domesticated fish. Very often they die like flies. There's often a real problem with, well, how do you get these fish to mature? You know, some people are putting these fish into spring-fed ponds. How do you know when to take them out and strip them? You think, well, you use your wild fish as a cue. They always spawn second week in December. Well, the fact that they're sitting in a pond that's full of spring water, they don't get the natural cue to mature. So you pull half a dozen of your fish out, you try and strip them, lo and behold, nothing comes out. You have to put them back in the pond. All of those fish that you touch and interfere with, you know, most of those end up as like, you know, like furry squirrel tails within a few days, and you've lost those fish as well. Then you suddenly find, well, hold on, I needed 25 pairs to satisfy the Environment Agency's guidelines to stop any of this genetic sort of bottlenecking. Lo and behold, you haven't got enough broodstock. So you've taken all of those fish out of the river, you've lost that wild production, you've either got to go out and catch some more wild broodstock or you've got to put them back. It really does need some careful consideration. And it's a folly or impossible to think that you are going to put these fish in and build a population just by stocking fertile fish without doing all the other things that you need to do in terms of addressing those habitat bottlenecks. because the population, if you've got wild fish there, you know, wouldn't have dropped in the first place had everything been right. Water quality, water quantity, habitat quality. Just a final few slides. Again, if you want fish to eat, you know, and you want wild broodstock, well, don't eat them all. And I know there are fisheries around the world where people now thought they had an inexhaustible supply of big wild fish. And the classic examples are some of the big Irish limestone lakes, where now they're beginning to think, well, actually, maybe we have caught and killed, you know, too many. So a lot of consideration has to be given to, you know, the fish you take and you eat. Unfortunately, if you really want wild fish, you have to put a lot of them back, I'm afraid, if you want to sustain angling and a wild population. So again, you know, in those sorts of situations, if you want fish to catch and fish to kill, triploids, you know, why not? It's a question I would pose. I'm not going to talk too much about the top bullet because I'm sure that will be sort of talked a bit about in talks later on in terms of genetic variation that undoubtedly exists in many systems. It's obvious to us, you know, as trout enthusiasts, trout buffs, we know that you can go to some rivers like that are famous, the River Kennet Greenback or the spotless land-born trout. You can see that you do get this genetic variation. Some of the things that are really critically important now, as I said to you before, you just can't see with your eyes. I think that the concept of this Victorian idea that fresh blood is going to somehow boost your wild stock, I don't think that's founded on sound science. And this one comes out so often. It's too late, we don't have to worry about it, we've been stocking for hundreds of years, you know, the horse has bolted. Well, the reality is, perhaps in terms of, you know, the wild component that you've got, maybe there are farm strain genes in those fish. Who gives a stuff if they're recruiting and they're doing well in a river system? The fact is, there's no reason to keep diluting that fitness and that success. If you've got fish in your river that are spawning and the fry are surviving, then you've just got to build on that. That's what we passionately believe. In my experience, batches of fertile fish sometimes don't perform as well. Batches of fish from fish farms vary every time you buy a new batch. But I think, you know, with the Wild Trout Trust, we're not really here to advocate or sell triploids, but they could be a tool and they're worth considering. All I would say is for all the people that sort of like criticise the fact that there's no sound science that underpins this policy, where's the sound science that underpin a lot of our own, as fishermen and fishing club, stocking programs, and indeed a lot of the EA stocking programs? I think the science there sometimes is a bit flaky. And just to finish up on, you know, if at the end of the day, you know, you do feel you have to stop because of the demand, the type of fishery you've got, the habitat bottlenecks that you just can't overcome, just a few things to think about. I would certainly advocate use sterile fish and build the wild component at the same time. If you have to stop with lower densities but more often. Don't lump great big large numbers of fish in all at once. A, you don't get the most out of them, but B, it does bring on more competition and predation for your wild fish. If you've got sea trout runs, you know, and your fishery is in that zone, it's not really smart stocking fish, you know, pre-smolt runs. And if you have got stockfish and they are sterile stockfish, then why have a bag limit later in the year? People are concerned about triploids potentially overwintering better than diploid fish. Well, catch and kill them then. That's the answer. But I don't think it's right that we should be wholesale diving into the argument of using a wild broodstock program just to augment catch. If you're restoring a river, that's one thing. If you're just augmenting catch, I think you have to think really strongly about that. I'm sure this debate will unfold, and I'm really looking forward to hearing some of the talks later on about the science that underpins some of these ideas. But that's it for now. Thank you.